Hello, listeners. Welcome to Marie Lives the Horror. This is episode 14 of the series of True Paranormal Ghost Stories. In this episode, I bring you 6 chilling tales of true ghost stories. So without further ado, step into my horror chamber as we live the horror together. Number 1. Slip in Time or Haunting. This is a story I wrote up a few years back on another site, which was not Reddit, but I think it will fit here too. This took place a few years back. There is a meat and 3 type restaurant in my hometown that's known for the great food and wonderful staff. It is run out of a building that was an old elementary school many years ago by a small group of very religious women. They have gospel groups there to play on Friday and Saturday nights, and the ladies are very sweet, pleasant, and they cook fantastic meals. My sister called me up one day and asked me to meet her there for lunch. I'm always willing to go get a home-cooked meal there. My sister Kay and I had a wonderful lunch and conversation with a couple of the ladies, and were just sitting and chatting while drinking tea. I had to go to the restroom and asked Kay where it was. She directed me up a short set of stairs through the old kitchen and said it was in the hall on the other side of the old kitchen. I trotted up the stairs and saw the old school kitchen to my left, a large open room with lots of counters, but empty, as the ladies had a smaller area downstairs where they cooked. As I stepped into the kitchen to cross it, I was struck by how incredibly cold the room was. It was summertime in the southern USA, and it wasn't this cold in the other areas of the building. This, I noticed, was odd. About halfway across the room, I suddenly had the feeling that I was being watched, and I became very fearful. I hurried through and into the restroom. The restroom was what you would expect from an old schoolhouse. Small room, 2 stalls, and a sink. The stall on the right was occupied, as I saw shoes under the door. So I headed into the one to the left. In a few seconds, I heard the other toilet flush, the squeaky door open, and the other person walk to the sink and wash their hands before leaving. I saw their feet pass by my stall, but never really got a look at the person. I finished up and headed back to the table, but took the long way around to avoid going back through the old school kitchen. Back at the table and chatting with Kay, I mentioned how cute the little schoolhouse restroom was, with its 2 stalls and the squeaky wooden doors. My sister, who still lived in our hometown and frequented this restaurant much more than I did, gave me a strange look and said, "There's only one working toilet in there. The other stall has no toilet in it, and they've got boxes stored in there." I told her that there had been someone in that stall who had flushed, walked out, washed their hands, and left while I was in my stall. That I had seen their brown loafer-type shoes under the door. I suggested that maybe they had put the second one back into use. She shook her head and said, "I was just here a couple of days ago. and there were boxes stacked in it. We decided that we would both head back to the restroom to see. I had not mentioned to Kay about my uneasiness with the kitchen, but as we got to the top of the stairs, she hesitated, then looked at me and asked if I minded if we went around the kitchen instead of through it. She said the kitchen makes her uneasy. I asked her, "You feel like you're being watched?" She nodded and said, "You too?" I told her about my experience with the kitchen earlier. We both found that very odd. So we stroll into the restroom, and I go to the stalls to open the door to the one on the right and show her a perfectly good working toilet. And I stopped dead in my tracks. There was no door on the front of that stall. There was no toilet in the stall, and it was packed front to back, side to side with boxes. Did I interrupt a ghost having a wee? I don't know. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I've had many unusual experiences in my life, but this one always stands out in my mind as one of the strangest. Number 2. My dead cousin, Jack. This post isn't about me. It's a story about my brother's experience. My brother was about 3, and I was about 8 at the time. We both had imaginary friends, but my brother said some things about his friend that creeped me out. If he wasn't playing with me, he was with his friend, Jack. I remember one day he was playing a game with stuffed animals, and I wanted to play, but he said Jack didn't want me to because we couldn't talk to each other. This creeped me out. But worse was my brother then started telling me all about Jack, that he was 6 years old and had a hole in his heart. I had no idea what any of that meant, so I went and told my mom later about Jack. My mom's face went white and she started panicking. She has always been very spiritual and does not mess around when it comes to this stuff. She did this thing called smudging, which is basically herbs with spiritual significance lit on fire and the smoke is wafted through the house, and it's supposed to help spirits pass on or go away. Well, a few days later, my brother came up to me crying and told me that Jack said they couldn't be friends anymore because he had to go home. I was so weirded out and confused that the only thing I could do was just play with him and distract him. Eventually, he forgot all about it. My mother only told me when I was around 12 to 13 years old, when I asked her about it and why she was so scared, that Jack was actually my cousin. He had a rare heart disease and died when he was 6. My family didn't like to talk about it because shortly after Jack's passing, his mother committed suicide because she was unable to cope with the loss of her child. I still, to this day, think about it. Number 3. Experience in the oldest neighborhood in my town. Here's another story. In the late 80s, early 90s, I lived in a 3-story older house in one of the first neighborhoods built in my town. So it was a very old neighborhood. I had roommates, and we rented the top 2 floors, and 2 other girls rented the bottom floor. There was also a basement underneath that ran the length and width of the house and had an outside entrance at the bottom of the driveway. We all used the basement for storage, and the landlord had put a washer and dryer in it for us to use. Nice guy. When you walked into the basement, there was a wooden divider on the front of the door that ran the width of that room that had shelves built for storage. Also, when you walked in through the outside door, the dryer was straight ahead against the back wall. The divider wall had a doorway close to and to the right of the dryer, and once you went through this door, you were looking at the washer. This space was a huge room with little in it but the washer and storage. The whole basement had dirt floors, so both the washer and dryer were up on concrete blocks to keep them off the dirt floor. There were many things that happened in that house, and I have no doubt it was haunted. But this is the one thing that really scared me. I was doing laundry one evening. My roommates were gone, and the girls below us were also. No cars but mine in the parking area. I had already put a load into the wash and walked down to take them from the washer to the dryer. I walked in, walked towards the dryer, turned right, went through the doorway, and approached the washer. I set my basket down, and because I'm short, 5'3", and it was on the blocks, the washer was too deep for me to reach to the clothes in the very bottom. So I would hop up, balance myself on my belly and hips on the side of the washer, with my feet off the ground. I would duck into the washer to reach for my clothes. Right as I was reaching for the last of the clothes, I was patted hard on my back. 3 hard pats. I jumped up and spun around to see who it was, and no one was there in the room, which was always cold or cool. This was summer in the southern USA, and I was in a tank and shorts. There was no way anyone could have gotten back through the door without me seeing them. I ran my happy butt out of the basement, up the driveway to my door, up the stairs and into the living room, shaking head to toe. I announced to whatever was there, "I don't mind sharing my space with you. I don't mind your little tricks you play. But you are never allowed to touch me again." As I said, many incidents happened in the years I lived there. Some would startle me, but this is the only one that really actually scared me. I never felt like it was evil or meant any harm. It or they just made their presence known from time to time. Number 4. I heard my husband's voice, but it wasn't him. This was about 2 weeks ago. I recently just got laid off of my job due to the pandemic, but my husband is an essential worker, so he still has to go in every morning. It was around 3 p.m. in the afternoon, and I was cleaning our kitchen and doing dishes. He usually doesn't get home until 5:30 to 6 p.m. every night. I was alone and wiping down our counters when I heard my husband calling my name downstairs. I immediately stopped and looked down at the staircase across from my kitchen. Then immediately, after hearing what I thought was him, I watched my cats run over to our stairway and jump up onto our banister and look down towards the door to the garage, like they always do when he gets home from work. So I thought he may have been just getting home early. Then quickly I realized I never heard our garage opening or his car door shutting. My cats were still perched there and seemed like they were awaiting him still. Then they both looked at me simultaneously with confusion. Then I responded back with his name in a questionable tone. There was no answer. That's when danger entered my mind. I immediately grabbed our pistol with safety still on, just in case it really were my husband. Couldn't be too sure it wasn't. Then again, I called out, "Hello? Who is down there? I am armed." Still, as silent as it was when I was peacefully cleaning. Then I call my husband, and he answers, and he could tell something was wrong even just hearing my voice before I explained what had just happened. I asked him if he made it home, and he said, "No, babe, I'm still at work." He always likes to prank me, and I thought maybe this may have been one of those times. I told him, "Tell me you are joking right now. I have the gun in my hand. If you're not home, something just said my name, and it sounded just like your voice." He hung up the phone with me and called me back on FaceTime so I could see he was still in fact at work. So now I'm thinking someone might be in the house. I checked every room and the windows and doors were all untouched. Then I began questioning if I was just hearing things. But the fact that my cats reacted the same time I did is reassurance that I'm not crazy. I think they heard it just as I did. I haven't heard the voice since. Number 5. The House of Evil. I am a longtime lurker here on Reddit, an occasional commenter. I apologize in advance for the mini novella. Let me preface this by saying that this wasn't actually my first paranormal experience. Also, for clarity's sake, I am an only child. I remember when I was somewhere between the ages of 8 and 10. There were 2 separate occasions where I was downstairs in my family's apartment by myself, late at night, getting a drink of water, when a table fan we had at the time turned itself on full blast for no reason, with no one who could have turned it on. Startled, I turned it off and went back upstairs, a little shaken but no worse for wear. And nothing else happened. Those were my very first obvious experiences. Looking back, I'd had a few other experiences, but just stuff like having a gut feeling, like a dislike for certain people who years later, when I was old enough to understand, I found out were pretty awful people. I also had recurring dreams/nightmares, that kind of stuff. Then we moved into the house. It was late May. I was 10. I turned 11 in December. It was a nice house, much bigger than our apartment, with property and a barn. Room enough for us and all of our farm animals. It was an uneventful summer and fall. I went to school, church with my mom, normal stuff. I turned 11 in December. I also hit quote-unquote puberty a couple of weeks later. I include this only because it's been noted time and again that the onset of puberty can exacerbate gifts, as well as the prevalence of paranormal occurrences. At the beginning of January, my dad died very suddenly. I'm not going to go into great detail, but basically he died from a massive blood clot that severed his brainstem. He collapsed and was rushed to the hospital on Saturday and was pronounced dead on Sunday. The next year or so was fraught with grief, turmoil, and depression. My mother drew away from me, sinking into her own depression. I struggled with school, all the things one would expect from such a sudden loss. I also started questioning religion. Up to that point, I had been a normal, happy Christian girl. Now, I started to question how a God that is supposed to be so loving and caring could let such a monstrous thing happen. Eventually, I turned to Satanism, but not true hedonistic, anarchist Satanism. I practiced it like people see in movies, with sacrifices. Now, being a 12-year-old girl, animal-loving girl, I couldn't bring myself to kill. So I did the next best thing in my adolescent thinking. I cut off chunks of my own hair and burned them. I also started cutting myself and burning the blood. As an adult who now falls somewhere between the line of pagan and Wiccan, I realize with hindsight what a terribly stupid and powerful thing this was to do. But as a preteen, I thought I was just being cool. Not long after I started practicing my own brand of Satanism, stuff started to happen. At first, it was little stuff, like occasionally hearing whispering voices outside my window at night. This eventually evolved into not being able to be outside at night without feeling like something was right behind me or beside me, just about to grab me. I couldn't go out to the barn after dark without having to run at full sprint, slam my back against the side while I opened the small door, and reach inside blindly to turn the lights on. I just knew that if I didn't have my back against something, I would be grabbed. I don't know how I knew, but I did. I also couldn't shower after dark without feeling like something was watching me from the window. This eventually got to the point where it felt like something was standing behind me in the shower. I would hear whispering inside the house at night once in a while. I'd occasionally see multiple sets of tiny little red eyes watching me from the bushes across the lawn from my window. They would even blink. One night, I had my curtains open and I was burning candles on a bookshelf while I talked with my boyfriend at the time on the phone. All the other lights were off in my room. I could clearly see the reflection of the row of candles in the window glass. I was lost in conversation with my boyfriend when I glanced up at the window and saw, several inches above the row of candles, reflections, two perfectly round balls of flame, like two eyes looking in from outside. Needless to say, I screamed and fled my room. My boyfriend was pretty confused, even after I explained to him what I'd seen. And when I went back into my room to investigate, the flaming eyes were gone. Now, the house we lived in was old enough to have a very deep foundation, so to have been looking in my window at that height, whatever it was, had to have been about 7 feet tall. Somewhere in amongst all that was happening, I also started occasionally dreaming, even daydreaming, about a dead little blonde girl in the attic/crawl space. I climbed up there, and no trace of anything but rat droppings could be found. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night, and there was all kinds of crazy glow-in-the-dark scribbling all over the wall beside my bed. I wish I'd given myself a chance to see if I could read what it said, but I was so freaked out that I turned the lights on and slept the rest of the night with them on. By the next night, the glow-in-the-dark stuff was gone. During this period of 3 years, my mother's behavior had been changing some too. She was distant and very critical of me. She was slowly getting more and more mean towards our farm animals, even getting to the point of screaming at them for no reason and hitting them on a few occasions. Very out of character for her. I was having rather frequent bouts of sleep paralysis during this time too. Not seeing things, just waking up paralyzed, and the only thing I could do to get rid of it was calm myself enough to doze back off and wake up properly. The last night we stayed there before moving was the scariest though. I had laid down to go to sleep. The lights were off. I was getting comfy. I heard some footsteps in the hallway, but figured it was my mom getting up to get something to drink or something. I even called out softly, but got no answer, and figured that she was just sleepy and didn't feel like answering. A little while later, I heard my door, which I left open a bit, creak open some more, but figured it was one of the cats coming in to share my bed. I even heard some shuffling around on the floor like one of the cats, but no cat jumped on my bed. So I figured I'd roll over and turn on the light to see which kitty it was and invite them for some cuddles. I didn't even get as far as turning the light on. Standing in front of my closet doors, a mere 4 to 5 feet away from me, was a shadow person. I've done the research since then, and it was Hatman. But I had no idea at the time what this thing was. All I knew was that I was intensely afraid of it, more afraid than I've ever been in my life. I flew off my bed and out of my room into my mom's room across the hall. I don't even think my feet touched the ground. Apparently, she had been fast asleep since she lay down, so there was no way the footsteps in the hall from earlier would have even been her. We went into my room, turning lights on as we went, but there was nothing there anymore. But I did end end up sleeping in her bed with her for the rest of the night. I found out from her that night, when we first moved into that house, she got such a negative feeling from it that before she would finish moving our stuff in, she got several ladies from her church to come and pray and bless each room. I also found out that she had had the feeling of being watched from her bedroom doorway at night for months before my dad had died. To this day, my mother and I believe that if we've never moved there, he'd probably still be with us. I have never went back to that house, and I never plan to. I still live in the same general area, a few towns away, and whenever I have to drive anywhere near it, I get a sinking, somewhat fearful feeling in my gut. And it's been almost 20 years since we moved away from there. We moved when I was 14, and I'm now 32. I've had a few more normal paranormal encounters since then, but nothing like the evil in that house. Occasionally, I even had vivid, realistic nightmares about living there again, or going back for some reason. The last time I had one of my nightmares about that house was as recently as 2 years ago. Nowadays, I've armed myself with protection spells, smudging and sealing, and I even wear obsidian plugs in my stretched ears. I know some of you won't believe me, and I don't blame you. I stay as skeptical as possible myself, but I know these things happen to me. I felt, heard, saw these things. They happened. Number 6. The Curious Ghost. This happened in the summer of 2014 when I was at my dad's house. I was around 16, but I remember this so clearly. So I really loved the house he used to live in because it was a pretty cool house after he fixed it up. He totally tore apart the front and back decks to redo them and make them safer. He could actually have a large party on the back deck if he wanted to. It was that big. This applies to the story, I swear. So one night, my dad and his wife got out, leaving me and her son alone at the house. So we pretty much hang out until he goes into his bedroom, which is across from mine. It was around maybe 8 or 9 p.m. when I started hearing almost knocking on the decks. They were soft, but I could 100% make them out to be knocking, and I tried to ignore it. That freaked me out so bad, but I didn't do anything about it. I was way too scared to look outside, and I didn't want to bother the only other person in the house. So, I texted my boyfriend at the time, and he told me it was probably raccoons. As much as I wanted to believe him, I really didn't. The knocks were way too rhythmic to be an animal just messing around. But I combated it by turning up the TV. Eventually, the knocking stopped, and I sort of forgot about it. Eventually, I did end up going into my bedroom and brought the dog with me. I had the door open because of the dog, and because it was pretty warm inside. I was planning on staying up until my dad and his wife got back, because if I woke up and heard the door open, I'd probably freak out. Anyway, it was around midnight, and I was texting and playing around on my phone when the dog started to growl and wag her tail. Initially, I ignored her because I thought the sun was getting up to go to the bathroom, which was between our rooms. But when she kind of woofed, I nudged her with my foot and told her to be quiet. Then I made the mistake of looking in my doorway. Standing in the half-open doorway was a tall black figure. There were no features, only an outline, but I knew it was a man, and I knew that it was looking at me. I couldn't see any eyes, but I could feel it staring at me. When I looked at it up and down, I clearly made out legs, arms, a neck and shoulders. I have never been more scared in my entire life. But I didn't feel like I wasn't in danger at all. Just more scared that there was an actual ghost in my doorway. After about a good minute of staring at each other, I pulled the blankets over my head, closed my eyes, and counted to 60 to myself. When I looked again, there was nothing, and the man was gone. When I pulled myself together and fully realized that I had seen a ghost, I went and closed my door. The dog had finally stopped growling and wagging her tail, and I finally was able to sleep. As soon as I woke up in the morning, I went and sat with my dad at the table, and when I told him that I heard someone knocking on the porch and saw a ghost man in the doorway, he looked at me dead serious and said, "Oh, that was Dale." So my dad pretty much failed to tell me that this house was haunted, and he knew it. He also had been seeing these things since he moved in a year before. The TV turned on and off by itself. My dad heard walking inside when he was the only one in the house, and he heard knocking on the porch just like I did. Not to mention, the man saw freaking orbs. Once he had seen someone walking on the deck early one morning. When he ran to go see who it was, he didn't see anybody on the deck, but there was a gray orb floating by the shop several yards away. The thing is, Dale had died before my dad bought the house. Dale didn't even die in the house. He died in Louisiana, and we are in Washington State. But so much of his stuff was on the property that we think he was attached to all of his things, so he came back. So from then on, when I stayed, I always sort of talked to Dale, but I never saw him after that one time. I don't know if Dale is in the house anymore, or if he must have moved on, because my dad had told me that after a conversation with Dale, nothing else weird happened, sort of. What my dad told me was that one day he was outside dealing with molehills when he felt like he was being watched, and he figured that it was Dale watching him. So my dad goes on to talk to Dale. He said, "Dale, I don't mind that you're here, and I know that this is your house, but you can't be scaring my kid, man. That's not cool. If you're gonna be here, just don't be scaring anybody. And maybe you can do something about these moles." And I shit you not, the rest of the time my dad lived in that house, he never had a mole problem. So Dale's last hurrah before he either chose to leave us alone and watch or move on, he made sure that my dad didn't have any more mole problems just because of a offhand comment he had said. Hello, listeners. Thank you for listening to this episode of True Paranormal Ghost Stories as you live the horror with me. If you would like to submit some of your own true paranormal experiences for me to narrate on this channel, check the description down below and send them over to my email. Do not forget to subscribe and click on the notification bell to keep up with future episodes. Thanks for listening. I am your host, Marie Lives the Horror.